Let me tell you about Jack, a seasoned trucker who had seen it all, or so he thought. One fateful night, Jack was driving a long haul through a desolate stretch of highway known as Route 66. The road was notorious among truckers for its eerie atmosphere and countless tales of strange occurrences. The night was pitch black, with only the dim glow of his truck's headlights cutting through the darkness. Jack had a long drive ahead and wanted to cover as much ground as possible before taking a break. As he drove, the highway stretched endlessly, with no signs of life for miles. Around midnight, Jack noticed his fuel gauge was lower than expected. He decided to stop at the next gas station, though he knew they were few and far between on this route. After what felt like an eternity, he spotted a flickering neon sign in the distance. It was a rundown gas station, barely visible through the thick fog that had started to roll in. Jack pulled in, relieved to find a place to refuel. The gas station looked abandoned, with peeling paint and broken windows. He stepped out of his truck, the cool night air sending a shiver down his spine. As he filled up the tank, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Finished with the fuel, Jack decided to head inside to pay and grab a cup of coffee to keep him awake. The door creaked open and a bell rang, announcing his presence. The inside of the station was just as dilapidated as the outside. Dust covered the shelves, and the faint smell of mold lingered in the air. Behind the counter stood an old man, his face hidden in the shadows. Jack greeted him, but the man didn't respond. Instead, he motioned for Jack to come closer. As Jack approached, he noticed the man's eyes were unnaturally bright, almost glowing in the dim light. The old man finally spoke, his voice raspy and low. He told Jack to be careful on the road ahead, warning him of dangers that lurked in the night. Jack, trying to brush off his unease, paid for the fuel and coffee, then quickly left the station. Back in his truck, Jack felt a sense of relief as he drove away from the creepy gas station. The highway was empty, and the fog had grown thicker, making it hard to see. As he drove, he began to feel drowsy. He decided to pull over at a rest stop he knew was up ahead to get some sleep. The rest stop was a small, isolated area with a few parking spots and a dingy restroom. Jack parked his truck and settled into the sleeper cab, hoping to catch a few hours of sleep. He had just started to drift off when he heard a faint tapping on his window. Jack sat up, his heart racing. He peered out the window, but saw nothing in the foggy darkness. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination and lay back down. The tapping started again, louder this time. Jack's anxiety grew as he opened the door and stepped out to investigate. He walked around his truck, shining his flashlight into the surrounding darkness. The fog was thick, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Suddenly, he heard a rustling sound coming from the bushes nearby. Jack called out, but there was no response. He approached the bushes cautiously, his flashlight beam cutting through the fog. As he got closer, the rustling stopped. Jack's flashlight flickered, and he felt a cold breeze brush past him. He turned around, his heart pounding, and saw a figure standing by his truck. It was a woman, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, her face pale and ghostly. Jack called out to her, asking if she needed help. The woman didn't respond. Instead, she started walking towards him, her movements slow and deliberate. Jack felt a wave of fear wash over him. He backed away, but the woman continued to approach, her eyes fixed on him. Suddenly, she vanished into thin air. Jack was left standing in the fog, his heart racing. He hurried back to his truck, locking the doors behind him. As he tried to calm down, he heard the woman's voice, whispering his name. Jack's fear turned to terror as he realized the voice was coming from inside the truck. He turned around and saw the woman was sitting behind him, her eyes glowing with an eerie light. She told him that she had been waiting for him, that he couldn't leave until he helped her. Jack, desperate to escape, asked her what she wanted. She explained that she had died on this highway many years ago, her body never found. She needed Jack to help her find peace by discovering her remains and giving her a proper burial. Determined to end the nightmare, Jack agreed to help. The woman vanished, leaving him alone in the truck. Jack started the engine and drove down the highway, following the woman's directions. The fog grew thicker, and the road seemed to stretch on forever. After what felt like hours, Jack arrived at an old, overgrown path leading into the woods. He parked his truck and got out, flashlight in hand. He followed the path, the woman's voice guiding him through the darkness. The forest was eerily silent, the only sound his footsteps crunching on the leaves. Finally, he reached a small clearing. In the center was a shallow grave, the dirt disturbed, as if something had been recently uncovered. Jack began to dig, his hands trembling. As he dug deeper, he uncovered the skeletal remains of a young woman, her bones wrapped in tattered clothing. Jack carefully gathered the remains and brought them back to his truck. He drove to the nearest town and found a small cemetery. With the help of a local undertaker, he arranged for a proper burial. The woman's spirit appeared one last time, her face filled with gratitude. She thanked Jack and told him she could finally rest in peace. As the grave was sealed, the fog lifted, and the first rays of dawn broke through the trees. Jack felt a sense of relief and accomplishment. He had faced his fear and helped a lost soul find peace. From that day on, Jack never traveled Route 66 at night again. He shared his story with other truckers, warning them of the dangers that lurked on the phantom highway. The memory of that night stayed with him, a haunting reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. Now, let me tell you about a trucker named Tom. Tom was a seasoned driver, used to long hauls and late nights on the road. One foggy night, Tom was hauling a load through a rural part of the country. The fog was so thick that he could barely see a few feet ahead of him. His GPS signal kept cutting in and out, making navigation a nightmare. Tom was supposed to take a specific route to his destination, but with the visibility so poor and the GPS failing, he missed his turn. Frustrated and tired, he continued driving, hoping to find a familiar landmark or a place to turn around. But the fog only seemed to get thicker, and the road more winding and confusing. Hours passed, and Tom began to realize he was completely lost. He hadn't seen another vehicle or a sign of civilization in what felt like an eternity. The road he was on seemed to twist and turn in impossible ways, leading him deeper into the unknown. His fuel gauge was dipping lower, adding to his growing anxiety. Finally, Tom saw a dim light through the fog. Relieved, he drove towards it, hoping to find a place to ask for directions or at least get his bearings. As he got closer, he saw that the light was coming from an old, decrepit gas station. It looked like it hadn't been in operation for decades, but the light inside suggested someone was there. Tom parked his truck and got out, the cold night air chilling him to the bone. He walked up to the gas station and peered through the dirty windows. Inside, he saw an old man sitting behind the counter, reading a newspaper. Tom knocked on the glass, and the man slowly looked up, his eyes narrowing. Tom entered the gas station, the door creaking loudly as he pushed it open. He greeted the old man and asked for directions, explaining that he was lost and needed to get back on track. The old man nodded slowly and told Tom that he had indeed taken a wrong turn and was far off his intended route. He offered to give Tom a map and some advice on how to get back to the main road. As the old man rummaged through a drawer for a map, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The gas station was filled with old, dusty items, as if it had been frozen in time. The air felt heavy, and there was a strange, almost oppressive silence that made Tom's skin crawl. The old man handed Tom a faded, yellowed map and pointed out a route that would lead him back to the highway. He warned Tom to be careful and to avoid a certain road that cut through the woods. According to the old man, that road was dangerous, and many who had taken it had never been seen again. Tom thanked the old man and left the gas station, eager to get back on the road. He followed the directions on the map, but as he drove, the fog grew even thicker, if that was possible. The road seemed to narrow and the trees closed in around him, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. After driving for what felt like hours, Tom realized he had somehow taken the very road the old man had warned him about. The forest on either side of the road was dense and dark, the trees seeming to move and shift in the fog. Tom's anxiety spiked as he realized he was in a place that didn't feel right, a place that seemed to be watching him. Suddenly, his truck's engine sputtered and died, leaving him stranded in the middle of the road. Tom tried to restart the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. He checked his phone, but there was no signal. He was completely alone, trapped in the haunted woods. Tom decided to get out and see if he could find any help or at least figure out where he was. He grabbed a flashlight from his cab and stepped into the fog, the eerie silence swallowing him whole. As he walked, he thought he heard whispers and faint footsteps behind him, but every time he turned around, there was nothing there. The road twisted and turned in impossible ways, and Tom soon realized he was hopelessly lost. The trees seemed to close in around him, and the whispers grew louder, almost mocking him. His flashlight flickered and died, leaving him in complete darkness. Desperate and terrified, Tom stumbled through the woods, trying to find his way back to his truck. He tripped over roots and rocks, his heart pounding in his chest. Just when he thought he couldn't go on any longer, he saw a faint light in the distance. He made his way towards the light, hoping it was his truck. As he got closer, he realized it was a small, abandoned cabin. The light was coming from a lantern hanging by the door, swaying gently in the breeze. With no other options, Tom decided to take shelter in the cabin. He pushed open the door and stepped inside, the musty smell of decay hitting him like a wave. The cabin was filled with old furniture and strange symbols carved into the walls. Tom felt a chill run down his spine as he realized he wasn't alone. In the corner of the cabin, he saw a figure hunched over, whispering to itself. The figure looked up, revealing a face twisted in agony and fear. Tom backed away, but the figure reached out to him, begging for help. It told him that it was trapped just like him, and that the only way to escape was to confront the entity that controlled the woods. Tom didn't know what to believe, but he felt a sense of urgency. The figure pointed to a trapdoor in the floor, telling him that the entity's lair was below. With no other options, Tom opened the trapdoor and descended into the darkness. The basement was a labyrinth of tunnels, the walls covered in strange, pulsating vines. Tom could hear the entity moving in the shadows, its presence sending shivers down his spine. He followed the tunnels, guided by the faint glow of the vines, until he reached a large open chamber. In the center of the chamber stood the entity, a monstrous figure of shadow and smoke. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its presence filled the room with a sense of dread. Tom knew he had to face the entity if he ever wanted to escape. With a deep breath, Tom confronted the entity, demanding to be set free. The entity laughed, its voice echoing through the chamber. It told Tom that he was just one of many who had fallen into its trap, and that there was no escape. Tom refused to accept this, and, in a moment of desperation, grabbed a nearby rock and hurled it at the entity. The rock passed through the entity, causing it to wail in anger and pain. The chamber began to shake, and the vines writhed violently. Seizing the opportunity, Tom ran back through the tunnels, the entity's screams echoing behind him. He climbed out of the trapdoor and fled the cabin, the fog parting before him. He found his way back to the road, where his truck miraculously started on the first try. He drove away from the haunted woods as fast as he could, not daring to look back. The fog lifted as he reached the main road, and the first rays of dawn broke through the trees. Tom had escaped, but he knew he would never forget the terror of that night. From that day on, Tom avoided rural roads and foggy nights, the memory of the haunted woods forever etched in his mind. He never spoke of the incident, but he knew that the entity was still out there, waiting for its next victim.